Welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neal, and I'm joined by Niels. I just asked you how to say this. Bourgonje, I believe.
Bourgonje is fine. Yeah. Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's very cool to have you here. And let everyone know, Swipe, your new short, is going to be playing at Shriekfest, which is coming up in LA.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. I love Swipe, and we'll talk about it, obviously, but give people an idea, which is kind of hard to do when it's a short, because you don't want to give too much away, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, the movie is about a woman who's on a dating app, and she encounters this creepy looking guy who she immediately swipes to the left. But then the guy pops up in her feed again. And for some reason, she can't get rid of him. And then he's getting a little bit too close for comfort.
And, it's interesting because at Shriekfest, there's a lot of filmmakers from different parts of the world. And I think Swipe really is universal because it's something that I think everyone can understand. Is that something you think about when you make a short, that it can play, everywhere?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, the funny thing is that despite the fact that I live in Amsterdam, so in the Netherlands, I actually shot it in New York.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I figured it was a good story to tell in New York. Like at the time, it was like during the Trump era, there was a lot of talk about misogyny and that kind of stuff. And I kind of felt like it fitted with and plus, like having this type of encounter in a really big city, which is really far removed from where I live. Like basically Amsterdam is like a big village and not close to a city. I felt like it really contributed to the alienation of the story. So we decided to shoot it there.
I know you mentioned that a lot of the shots kind of give you that feel like, you're small and you're alone and like down along the hallway, just in the big city.
Yeah, it's funny because usually when you don't have a lot of budget, one of the things that you often talk about with producers is like, should we or should we not have enough money for extras? But in this case, I actually told my producer, you know what, let's not have any extras, because I kind of felt like it would be creepier if she was walking by herself and you didn't see anyone close to her because she couldn't, call for help. So I figured that this would actually really add to the atmosphere.
That's a good point, because some of my friends yell at me because I like to travel around and I don't mind walking around cities at night. I know, my guy, it's a little different. But still, I always think if you're somewhere that's all lit up and there's a lot of people, if you use a little bit of common sense, you'll probably be all right. But if you go down places where you're alone, then, bad things could happen.
Exactly. And it's funny because I often think about like, why do I always cast a woman in this type of scenario? But in this case, I really felt like it should be a woman because, for a lot of women, dating apps can be pretty scary. Like before I had a girlfriend, like I was on dating apps as well. And I never had like a weird, scary encounter, even though like every woman that I know who was on a dating app had at least one encounter that was kind of scary. Yeah. So it kind of fitted.
There's something I thought about when I don't give away a lot of it, but there used to be a part of Facebook that actually would tell you your friends, like how close they were. And like, It kind of creeped me. I wasn't on the dating part or anything. It would just show up like so-and-so is like 2 miles away and under a mile. And I always thought, man, that's just like creepy. It's almost like a stalker app for Facebook, like built in, which I don't think is on there anymore.
No, but it's funny. Like you bring up a good point. Like in a way, like these dating apps are like the perfect tool for stalkers. So I always felt like and that's why at the time when I was still on a dating app, I was so fascinated by women who would put their Instagram or their, place of work, all these things. They're really private. And I'm like, well, I'm a good guy, so I wouldn't do anything. But if you would encounter a creepy guy, he would probably think, oh, no, I know where that place is. I actually could just visit her at her work. It's the perfect place for a stalker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's weird because, you don't want to be like untrustworthy, but at the same time, if you're too trusting, you're more vulnerable.
Yeah, like common sense helps. Like, yeah. And then with these types of apps, it's sort of like, you better be safe than be sorry.
Yeah. So what were you doing in New York when you filmed it? Were you there for this or were you there for another reason?
Well, it's funny because originally, like a couple of months prior, when I was still developing the short, but I didn't actually decide to shoot it in New York. I was in New York to visit a friend who was a producer, and it was during Halloween. So we were talking about horror movies, and she was actually more of a documentary producer. But I had this idea, and I'm like, you know what? It would actually be a really interesting thought to place this in New York, and would you be interested in that? And she actually made a couple of documentaries about women who were harassed online. So she immediately knew the arena. And then a couple of months later, we decided to, shoot it there. So I was in New York just for the short.
Oh, cool. So I thought all the locations looked great. Like I said, even the hallway, I really like the staircase and stuff. So were these just, did you go, how did you come about, like, where you're going to shoot it? I know you're in New York, but did you have to just travel around and like, hey, this is a good place? And
well, my producer lives in New York, so that really helps. And she gave me a couple of options where we could shoot. But funny enough, like, I think she started out by saying, we could always shoot it at my place because I have a pretty cool staircase and interesting, place where I live. And I don't know why, like, probably because I've visited her place a couple of times before. I was like, yeah, no, but we'll probably find something that's better. But then when we were looking at the location photos that she sent me, I kept thinking, I don't know, like, is it, like, obviously you have to believe that the main character has a living space that fits with what she does. And she's a student, so it can't be too big, but you do want to place the camera somewhere. And then the place where my producer lives has this really long hallway that we could, really, really use.
Yeah, it really works.
Yeah, and it kind of looks a little bit abandoned in a way. So that also really fitted. So, and then I was like, you know what? Let's just shoot it at your place. It's actually ideal. And then when we decided that we were going to shoot it at her place, we found a sort of like a college that was pretty close to where she lives. And we found this other location, like near like all these apartment buildings that looked really cool. So then we, just decided to shoot everything pretty close to where she lives.
There's something I always find just inherently creepy about a long hallway. I don't know why, especially like in a hotel, and if it's late at night or when there's not anyone walking around, it always looks creepy, I think. Makes me think of Barton thing.
It's probably just the idea that you have, like, you'd see exactly there's no place to hide. It's just a long straight corridor, and I think that's sort of the idea that if you and in the movie, like, I'm not going to give anything away, but in the movie, the main character actually looks through a spy hole, so she should be safe,
right,
in that scene. But because you see it from her perspective, from her point of view, it still adds to the creepiness. And it's funny because we were shooting it, and then while we were shooting it, one of the lights actually flickered just once. And then in the edit, we decided to replicate that. So now it looks like the light is constantly flickering. And it's a cliche, but it works really well.
Yeah. It's interesting because I normally, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine in movies when people are looking at their phone. It's just like, why do I want to watch something where person's just looking at their phone? But it really works in here. And when you're making it, does that come into mind? Like, how do I make this interesting when it's primarily, someone looking at their phone?
Yeah, I guess I'm really fascinated by stories about people who are sort of like obsessed with their phones. Maybe because I'm one of these people myself. But I also,
I didn't have a phone till I think about 8 years ago. And then my co-host at the time, Annabelle, she's like, you can't not have a phone. And I was like, I'll never use it. But yeah, I have it all the time now.
Well, I'm of the generation where when I was a kid and I wanted to ask a girl out, the first thing I had to do was call the landline, and then I would get her parents on the phone and would hear this, this discussion in the back, like, who's this guy? And then finally you would get her on the phone. And now these days, like, the middleman has been cut off and you can go straight to, anyone you want to approach. And I think there's also something creepy about it because there's no filter anymore. And I think that's sort of like what interests me about this storyline, because, you can approach anyone. And like I said, like, it's a stalker's dream. So and and the story was so much, telephone based that as a viewer, you kind of want her to look at the phone because that's where the new information is, especially when you're sort of like, as a viewer, you're figuring out how the stalker is actually getting closer and how as a viewer you can tell. So then it actually becomes quite exciting to see what she sees.
Yeah. And you can't make the excuse like it used to be. If you'd call someone's house, you'd say you weren't home or something, but everyone has their phone on them at all the time. So if they're not answering, they're probably doing it, purposely.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a good point.
And the music, the score really adds a lot to the tension.
Yeah, like I'm really lucky because I think around 8 years ago, I met this really talented Danish composer who was actually living in LA at the time, and he now had to move back because of COVID. But he is a really talented composer. His name is Jesper Ankerfeldt, and he's great. Like he scored everything I've done for the last 8 years, and I can't wait to work with him again.
Yeah, it was great. And how about the main character, Ebony Obsidian, which is a great name, by the way.
Right? Yeah, it's funny. It's funny also because her name is Ebony, and the guy who plays the villain, his name is Jefferson White. So I don't know. It added a layer to the film.
And you kind of reversed the cliche of the black hat being the villain and the white hat being the good guy.
Right. Exactly. So Ebony, like we were really lucky because my producer knew someone who knew Ebony. So I kind of because I made a movie in LA before, and at the time we had a really tough time finding a right actor. And I kind of figured out that if you want to approach a really talented actor, you kind of have to know them or know someone that knows them. Because if you want to do it through the official channels like an agent or a manager, it's really difficult. And my producer knew someone who knew Ebony, and it was also one of the first actresses that she brought up. Like you could, maybe she would be interesting. And at the time, she just finished doing the Barry Jenkins film, If Beale Street Could Talk. So she was, really starting to make a name for herself. And now she's on this show called Sisters, which is a big hit, I think. So we were just really lucky because when I met her, the thing I did before was actually see If Beale Street Could Talk, but it wasn't playing in my country yet. And I was so moved by it, and she was great. And then like 5 minutes later, she was sitting in front of me. So it was really bizarre, especially for me who lives in Amsterdam and doesn't always get to meet actors. So no, it's great. We're really lucky with her.
In Amsterdam, I don't know, because I've never been there, but is it hard to get into like movie making? Is that something that's accessible?
I guess so. Yeah, it's, because it's not a big country, I guess it's pretty easy to network. Like a lot of filmmakers are struggling. So maybe I'm at a point now where I'm really lucky how I was able to, be a full-time filmmaker and, also do commercials and making a living out of it. I know a lot of filmmakers aren't that lucky. So in a way, I guess I was really lucky. But now I'm also really interested in seeing if I can maybe do more stuff in America. And I was really lucky with Swipe because when Swipe premiered, it was actually sent to a couple of managers and agents, and I was able to sign by WME. So I was really lucky with that, and I found a really amazing manager. And now we're sort of like developing a couple of feature projects in the States. So so that's really exciting.
Well, along those lines, first of all, I think Swipe looks great. It's shot really well. It looks very professional. And I always wonder, like, what's a goal when you make a short? Because sometimes now there are more platforms where they can go. But I know a lot of people who only make shorts, and that's cool. But I always think you would think you'd make a short hoping to either make a feature or something else. So when you started making them, was that like kind of your idea? Like this is like a showcase of what I can do?
Absolutely. Yeah. And absolutely. Like it wasn't really meant as a proof of concept, like this movie in particular, but it was a very conscious decision to shoot it in New York and to shoot it with a American crew and make it look as, as professional, but also as American as possible. So it would maybe give me some opportunities. And in that case, I guess it worked because, like I'm doing some stuff there. And, like when I grew up, I wasn't in love with movies because of shorts. I was in love with movies because of feature films. Mm-hmm. So for me, making shorts is just a really good opportunity to sort of like try out everything. And like I've made dramas, I made comedies. Now I'm more in the horror sphere. So now I'm doing a lot of those kind of movies. But it's, it just gives you the opportunity to dive into a certain genre, but not spend like 2 years of your life. And then if you find out, no, it's not really for me, then you can move on. And I guess due to Swipe, I really found a love for the genre. So now, ever since I directed Swipe, I've actually directed a couple of other horror movies. So I think I'm really gonna focus on this for a while.
So what were the things that you watched that made you want to become a filmmaker? Because I know I do the horror show, but I actually like all different kinds of movies. So.
Oh man, there were so many movies. Like I could like name hundreds, but I guess, I'm an 80s kid. So I guess someone like Steven Spielberg like had a really big influence, not just the movies he directed, but also the movies he produced. But, when I was a teenager and kind of dived into more like classic cinema, obviously I fell in love with, Alfred Hitchcock. But at the time, during the 90s, really interesting filmmakers like David Fincher, and also Tarantino, but particularly David Fincher was a big influence. Like I really remember seeing Seven when I was 15. And being blown away by it. And I think he was definitely one of the filmmakers that made me want to be a director.
Yeah, that is a great movie. And I'm sure most people agree. But what was it about Seven? Was it, what was it about that movie specifically?
I think what I loved about Seven so much is that when you start out watching that movie, it feels like the type of movie you've seen 100 times before. Like it's sort of like this serial killer / buddy cop movie. But then it turns out to be so completely different. I think when I saw that movie, it really made me realize what a director does and how you can like really put your stamp on something. And I think because I was 15 at the time, that I sort of like, I guess I never quite understood what a director did. And I think just watching that movie, I understood perfectly what the director did. So I think it just helped me make a decision of what I wanted to do with my life.
That's interesting because I always think too that a lot of people assume a director really is just the guy with the camera, like shooting stuff, which he's not even doing that a lot of times. It's the cinematographer. But I do think a lot of people don't realize, and when I've been on sets the last couple of years for a couple of things, then it gave me a really different idea of what the director does and all the different takes and why it's called director, I guess.
Yeah. And there's so many different types of directors. Like you have directors who are, when you walk on the set, you immediately recognize the director, someone who's very like focal and very, you can't take your eyes off of him. But I've also encountered directors who will sit somewhere in a corner watching their monitor. And sometimes they say something to their DOP or their first AD. But basically, they're just watching a monitor and not interact as much. And the one, like the first is not better than the second. It's just a different style. And I think it's a type of profession that doesn't really have a way of doing it. There's like 100 ways, and all of them can be terrific. So it's and you never get bored. Like every project I do, like I learn something new. I expand my horizon. It's just, I still get a huge kick out of it. And I've been doing it for like 15 years now. So it's great. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even two ones you mentioned, Hitchcock and Spielberg. I mean, no one's going to argue their movies are bad, but one was like notoriously not a pleasant guy to the actors. And one guy like no one ever says anything bad about. And so like I said, not one way is the right way. It was the right way for one guy and the right way for the other guy.
Exactly. And there you go. Like they're like two completely different people. And I think someone like Hitchcock would really struggle. And agreed, like he should struggle in this current climate.
Yeah, same thing like Stanley Kubrick, because you hear all the horror stories, but I don't, that not that it's good, but I don't think it would work today.
No, but it kind of depends. Like someone like Stanley Kubrick, he wasn't necessarily like a bad guy. He only maybe his behavior on the set of The Shining,
right?
He sort of like traumatized Shelley Duvall might be a little bit like not quite sure if I would agree with that, but he's like he I don't think I've ever heard something bad about Kubrick. And I think someone like Fincher is not too different from a Stanley Kubrick. He also does a lot of takes, like often he does like 80 or 100 takes. And someone like Spielberg, I think he does maybe like 15 takes or something like that. And he's I think a very chill, easygoing guy. So and they're all geniuses. So, there's not one way to do it right.
Yeah. So doing the commercials, does that help you in your film doing like a narrative?
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Well, first of all, it gives me the opportunity to pay my rent.
Sure.
So, and that's
always a plus. Yeah.
And that's always a plus. But it also, gives you some freedom to actually not feel too guilty about the time that you spend on fiction projects. Or you could actually decide, I'm going to do a fiction project for me and not do a fiction project because I need to make money. And that makes my decisions whenever I do a project much clearer, because if I needed to do like fiction projects to pay my rent, maybe I then would be very tempted to, direct projects that aren't necessarily the type of project that I would watch. And I think as a director, that's really important, because you shouldn't, everyone should do whatever they want. But I guess for me, it really works that I direct projects that I would watch myself, because then I know how to direct it, because I know what type of audience I am. And so commercials, it just it gives me the opportunity to direct what I want.
Yeah, I mean that comes up a lot with friends of mine who make independent movies. A lot of them will, they're editors by trade or something, and then like you said, then they can go and make the movies that they enjoy making in their free time.
Yeah. And plus, like commercials, they give you the opportunity to just try out a lot of techniques. So, like on a commercial, usually I'm like working on that for like a month or maybe 2 months. And then afterwards, you're going to do a completely different commercial. So sometimes, I work a lot with kids, but I also direct food stuff, which is very technical, and all these types of different projects, but you always learn something from it.
Yes,
so either
I would assume that would just help you with the craft of actually, making something.
Exactly. Yeah, sometimes you learn something that you think, what, I want to use this that I learned on this commercial, and I want to use it for a fiction project. And that has happened a lot. So for me, like that combination of doing a fiction project and a commercial, that's just ideal.
Mm. So you said when you did Swipe, you got a different appreciation for horror. Did you start to watch any horror movies that you hadn't seen before?
Oh, so many. Like I was always a big movie buff and also a big like horror buff. So in that respect, I don't think a lot has changed, but I watch it differently. And I guess now I would watch horror, even though it might not be like top of my list to watch it. But it almost feels like homework, even like watching a bad one or someone like a horror movie that isn't necessarily like a classic, but just, entertaining. Like I can always get something from it. Like I can always watch it and think like, oh, that's an interesting technique, or oh, I might use this, or oh, wow, I would never do this. So it in a way, I guess it added to my taste that I wanted to explore that genre more. So I started watching it a lot more, but I was always a big horror buff before.
That's interesting is what you said there about, because I like a lot of movies that, like you said, might not be technically a great movie, but they're enjoyable. But I don't think that's people have that thought for most genres. It's like horror. You can watch like a kind of a bad horror movie and still enjoy it, but you're probably not going to watch like a bad drama and think, "Oh, this is fun to watch."
Exactly. Like even a bad horror movie is still fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you still get a lot out of it. And if a drama is bad, it's just a waste of time. Yeah. But that also, and I guess that's also one of the reasons why I like the genre so much, because there's so many ways to like make a horror movie that's interesting that isn't always connected of it being like good, or like it can be technically good, or it can be very daring, or it, like, to give you a very contemporary example, like I saw James Wan's *Malignant*.
I was actually that's exactly what I was thinking of, because I just saw it too. But
and it's
technically, I would say it's not good, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. Yeah,
it's funny because I watched it a week ago. Me and a buddy of mine who's also a horror director, and while we were watching it, we were sort of like whispering, like, "Is it bad?" Like it's really hard to tell. Like there was definitely stuff that was not great, but I think it's like it's been a week since I watched it, and still I'm thinking about it. And still, I'm sort of like fascinated about it. So
I am too. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it's weird because it feels like a movie. If it would have came out in the 80s on VHS tape with like a much smaller budget, I think it would. Some of the people who don't like it would have loved it, because it feels like watching like Basket Case or a movie from the 80s, and but yet it's a big budget mainstream movie. And yet it's like totally batshit crazy. So I don't know. There's something about that was very appealing for me in the theater, watching it with like people that I think kind of like mainstream movies. And then it's about halfway through, it really just goes bonkers. And just all of that really added to the enjoyment for me.
Yeah, no, it's funny. But I think the mistake I made when I started watching it was I thought it would be similar to movies like Insidious or The Conjuring.
Yeah.
But then when you're watching it, like even from the opening scene, I'm not going to spoil anything, but from the opening scene, you're already like, this is a very odd choice to go into this direction. And I should have known better. I really want to see it again, because now I'm sort of like really interested in how I would watch it the second time. So it's it's fascinating. It's definitely a movie that if you're a horror buff, you're gonna get a big kick out of it, because it has so many references to like D'Argento and De Palma, and Basket Case is a good example. So it's a very interesting movie, but definitely for genre love it. Like I wouldn't take my girlfriend to see that movie.
Yeah, I don't think it's like for more of a mainstream audience.
No.
Yeah, and it actually kind of goes back to where you're talking, because I think it's a movie James Wan. I mean, he could make. He makes big, huge movies. So this is probably not a movie that like they told him like, "Hey, make this. It's going to do well." I think it seems like something he really wanted to make, and he's like, I'm just going to go for it. It's like this really crazy movie.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to some buddies before watching it, and I was like, you know what? I really hope that this movie is going to remind me of like De Palma when he did like movies like Raising Cain. Like he was in the studio system and he made these big movies, but then he figured, you know what? I've made a couple of really big movies for you guys. Let me just do this movie just for me, and just let me just explore something that I haven't explored yet. And that's kind of what it is. It really feels like Wan trying to, expand on a type of genre of horror that he hasn't done yet. And in that respect, I really respect him, because a lot of directors would be punished for a movie like this, and still he decided to do it. So it's definitely like a very daring, interesting movie.
Yeah, and if people like it or don't like it, it is interesting that everyone's talking about it. And I think that's better than just a movie that, comes and goes and people are like, whatever. Yeah. It's better to have people really like it or really dislike it, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have a favorite horror movie or a couple?
Oh, God. Well, it's funny because when you name like the favorites, it's always the cliched ones, So, but a movie that I rewatched recently to see if I still enjoyed as much as I did when I watched it when I was a kid was the original Candyman.
Oh,
which,
nice.
when I saw it, it was one of my, favorite horror movies. But I was, at exactly the right age when I saw it, when I was like completely obsessed with horror movies, but also with horror movies that kind of took itself very seriously. And I think at the time when Candyman came out, you had all of these horror movies that are like, they were trying to be either meta or they tried to be funny. And Candyman was like really serious and really was trying to say something about the world that we were living in. And now, this type of horror has, even its own name, like what's it called again? Like elevated horror, I think it's called. Yeah. But I rewatched it because of the new Candyman, and it's still so incredibly good. Like the score from Philip Glass and the whole atmosphere, and I just think it's like a classic. And I'm really glad that due to the new one, that a lot of people are rediscovering Candyman, because I really think it's really, really good.
Yeah, I do too. It's actually one of my mom's favorites.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Did you like the new one?
I did, but it wasn't as good as the original. And like obviously that's something that's easy to say. I thought it had a really good elements to it, but Tony Todd was magnificent. Like he's a legend in the original, and it's so impossible to even get close to that type of charisma. So it was sort of impossible. But I think they made some really cool choices, and I really hope that they're going to do a new one, because the new one could actually be even more interesting than the current one.
It's definitely set up to continue.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I liked it, but I had some issues with some things, but overall I liked it. But again, it's hard to compare it to the original movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Are you working on anything currently?
Oh yeah, I'm working on
maybe a feature or something.
Yeah, no. So I have a new short that is almost done called Shut, which is going to be released, I think, early next year. Which is going to be another horror movie, but I shot it in Holland, so it's not a American film. I'm doing two shows here in Holland. One is a Halloween special of a show that's already being released here, and then another one is a child's horror show that is basically like ages 8 to 12, which is a really interesting age to make horror for. I'm attached to a blacklist script called The Interventionist, it's a really terrific script. So we're currently talking to actors for that. So when we attach like really interesting talent, that would probably be the first feature I'm going to do. And I'm developing a feature film of this movie, of Swipe.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it definitely feels like it could be expanded. So.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about it, and we have a very cool production house that's interested in doing it, and we have a writer now, and it's becoming really interesting and really coming together. So I'm really excited about it. Very cool.
And so Swipe's going to be at Shriekfest, and I know you're in Holland, or Netherlands, so I don't know if you'll be at Shriekfest. But have you been at any at festivals that played it?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, the movie came out, I think, almost 2 years ago. So I was lucky that I was able to experience it at a couple of festivals that, screen it on a big screen where I was able to attend. So I saw it in New York and I saw it in LA before, and a couple of other festivals. But then obviously COVID happened. And then like the last year, year and a half, actually, I wasn't able to see it on a big screen with audiences, which is a bummer, because this genre is like the perfect, genre to experience it with an audience. So I was really bummed about that. And the current corona measures here in Holland kind of make it impossible for me to, now go to LA. So I was sort of planning to go, but now unfortunately I can't. So I won't be at the festival, which is a real shame. But, due to, an interview like this, and I'll try to be very, active on social media. I hope people will, take the time to respond or, tell me what they thought of the movie, because, since I won't be able to be there, I really hope that I will get some cool response from audiences.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the main things I miss is going to the festivals over the last year. I mean, obviously, I want everyone to be safe. That's most important, but I do miss going to the festivals.
Yeah. Well,
like you said, it's the interaction. Watching horror or comedy with people is a fun experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then afterwards, most people get together and talk. The filmmakers and fans and who press, everybody, which is a good part.
And like I said, like Swiped is the first horror movie that I did, and I really I think I made more friends at horror festivals than I did at other film festivals. Like, I don't know why, but I guess they kind of feel like kindred spirits in a way, that if you like this genre, you're already you can already be friends for life. So, and I made some really cool international friends due to horror film festivals. So it's been so much fun, and I can't wait to, visit a new one. So hopefully you can do that soon.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone has this common love, and I find that horror fans, for the most part, there's always exceptions, everybody, but are very accepting of other people, because horror fans are all different. There could be like some guy with a bunch of tattoos and looks crazy, and someone who looks pretty normal like yourself. So it could be anybody.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think a lot of horror fans. And maybe I'm speaking more about myself, but I think it's sort of like a genre that is really attractive to outsiders. And I think because of all of these outsiders, they end up making horror movies that when you meet each other at film festivals, there's already this sort of connection. And like I said, I've made really cool friends at film festivals, I think. And also, if you're a fan of horror movies, there's so many films you want to talk about, because there's a lot of people who don't like horror. So whenever you meet someone who does like horror, you're like, oh, we have to talk about it. I'm kind of feel like the guy from The Simpsons from the, we have to talk about it. Right. So and it's been great. I really miss going to film festivals. So I hope I can do that soon.
Yeah. And the internet gets a bad rap, maybe even in your movie in some ways, but there is good parts of it. It is you can find other people who are into stuff that, growing up, there weren't a lot of people I knew that were into horror movies, but then you get online and you find a bunch of people. And same thing with the festivals.
Yeah, and I guess one of the few things that is a positive out of the whole COVID situation is that people were forced to interact through, through Zoom. But I guess
we didn't do the show through Zoom till COVID. I didn't even know what Zoom was. So.
Well, there you go. And then, through Zoom, I was able to also meet a lot of really cool people like yourself. And now we can interact. And this wouldn't have happened if I wasn't able to attend the film festival. And now we're still talking. So, there's good things and bad things, and I'll just try to focus on the good things. So I'm not necessarily I'm definitely not about bad mouthing the internet, even though in my movie I'm doing it a little bit.
Right.
But it has a lot of really big advantages.
Yeah, very cool. Well, this has been very cool to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
And I hope people check out Swipe. I really liked it, not just because you're here. And I also watched some of the other stuff. I watched Buddy, which I really liked. Not horror, but people want to check it out. It's online. And I checked out your Maestro burger ad for McDonald's, which did pretty good.
Yeah, I also did that. Yeah, and hopefully next year I'm going to be at Shriekfest with another horror movie that I did called Woodland Cemetery, which is already playing at a couple of other festivals. Oh, cool. There's a lot of stuff coming. So stay tuned.
I will. Very good. And by the way, how can people follow you if they would like to follow you? Not find out exactly where you are,
Yeah. So on Instagram, it's my name, which is difficult enough. So it's www.instagram.com and then /Niels Bourgonje. And my website is also myname.com. My Vimeo is vimeo.com/my name. So just type in my name and you'll find me.
Right. And if you don't know how to spell it, it'll be right here in the on the video, unless I misspell it. But I'm sure it won't. Yeah. All right, very cool. This has been very fun.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Fun to talk to you, dude.
Yeah, we'll do this again sometime.